In Iraq, by virtue of one's vulnerability to arrest through proximity to an event, criminality became defined as the act by which freedom expressed itself in surrender to detention. Now, this is going to seem like perhaps a strange move in this context, and what I would like to suggest to you in general, and I'll try and walk us through the reasons for my thinking of this, is that what one sees in the photographs at Abu Ghraib is a mutation, not only in the ways in which war and torture are represented, but in the forms and the motivations by which it is undertaken, the displacement of what was previously an almost exclusively libidinized structure of antagonism by a racialized religious structure antagonism in which sexual violation gets not substituted for, but supplemented by the pursuit of pleasure in the observation, in the looking at, in the especially deferred looking at, others consenting to be violated. That's maybe a kind of radical statement, and I'm going to try and tell you why I think that is the case. Why I think that those photographs are shocking, not just because they express enjoyment or reflect enjoyment, but because they are, in the representational domain, the counterpart to a practice which demands that others consent to their own violation. Think of the levels on which this might be true. The argument that Iraqis wanted to be liberated in the form of being bombed. Think of this in the level of the repeated scenarios that are actually remarked in all of the reports generated by the DoD, in which people are asked to perform sexual violation of themselves and with each other in a way that offers itself to be seen by those in control of detention, and which many of the people who possess such images said were merely scenarios in order to generate photographs, the later consumption of which was the real purpose. One often thinks of these torture scenarios as ones that entail very direct violations of person's dignity and sexual being. Of course, this happened, but it happened in a very mediated way. It happened in a manner that demanded of those people who were detained to violate each other and to perform constantly, this is a horrible part of what was going on, their excitability upon command. Forced to engage each other sexually, forced to demonstrate that they could be aroused in that process, forced, therefore, in some strange way to display the simulacrum of a consent to be violated. In the moment that other people are asked to perform sexual violation, there arises a question as to the degree to which they wish not to participate, a doubt about their capacity to exempt themselves from the process of violation. Now, it is not an invention of the Iraq War, whether we imagine it started in 2002-3, or whether we imagine it as a continuation, a second moment, vis-a-vis the earlier war. It is not the invention of the Iraq War to take photographs of torture. And there have been very few wars since the inauguration of photography that have not involved and that not have generated an archive of images of violence. It's interesting to consider how very different those images are over time. If you look at the photographs of the first sort of, photographed wars of the Crimean and the Civil War in the U.S., you have inevitably images of empty tableaus of after-the-factness, either heaps of bodies or heaps of cannonballs, photography not being so mobile, so available for deployment in field situations. By World War I, you have the photography of anticipation, the endless documentary of trench warfare, the waiting, the domesticity of warfare, and then also the spectacle of the gas fields and the aerial bombardments. By World War II, the spectacle of aerial bombardment has become, in fact, perhaps the dominant imagery of warfare, whether that's, Dresden seen from above or Hiroshima and Nagasaki seen from offshore. And we all know that since 1991, at least, we've had a further mutation with the warhead-mounted cameras and the embedding of journalists and the strange kind of immediacy that allows us to experience both nullification in the moment that bombs fall and the weird and ethically totally demobilizing sensation of surviving it all. Because in the moment you believe you can survive war, you are no longer held accountable for it in a strange way. So it's not that that the images of Abu Ghraib or the images of Iraq represent the first moment. And there are, of course, lots of photographs of torture from at least the 20s. It's not that it's the first moment in which photography becomes cathected to the project and the practice of waging war. It's not the first time that images of violence have circulated as part of extending the force of the state or those who perpetrate violence in order to incite terror and conformity. But it is odd in the degree to which these images have been imagined or are being produced in ways that feature, as I said, the strange scenario in which detainees must perform and undertake and actually perpetrate the violence whose observation is so frequently later said to be the basis of satisfaction on the part of those who possess, traffic, send back and forth through the email, and use as screensavers these images. On the one hand, you could say this represents a complete banalization of the images. It can only be that they have lost their efficacy and their force if they can be functioning in these banal forms as screensavers and so forth. Or that the ubiquity of these images has in some ways attenuated their capacity to elicit force. Probably both of those things are in some way true, and perhaps we have to up the ante historically in each moment in order to shock ourselves. But possibly, too, it reflects a change in the way in which war is being perpetrated and in the ways in which it is, on the one hand, sexualized and on the other hand, racialized. And I'd like to suggest that there are a lot of grounds for thinking that it does represent a change in the way in which war is sexualized, not by displacing that older logic in which one waged war in order to get women or in order to have access to goods or to land or to natural resources such as oil. It hasn't displaced that. It has supplemented, augmented, and thereby changed the sexual and racial economy in which warfare is conducted now.